Welcome to When Africa Speaks, where legends come alive and greatness calls to greatness. In every corner of this vast continent, from the golden sands of the Sahara to the rolling hills of the south, from the ancient kingdoms of the west to the mighty mountains of the east, extraordinary souls have walked this earth. Men and women who dared to dream beyond their circumstances, who chose courage over comfort, who built bridges where others saw only rivers. This is our legendary corner, where the echoes of heroes past whisper secrets to the champions of tomorrow. Here, every story carries a spark, every tale holds a mirror, and every legend asks the same powerful question: what greatness lies sleeping within you? The world is waiting for the next legend. That legend could be you. That legend could be anyone brave enough to believe that ordinary people can do extraordinary things. Join our growing family of dreamers and achievers. Hit that subscribe button and let these timeless stories awaken the giant that lives inside your heart. Because when you discover the hero in someone else's story, you begin to write your own. In the bustling town of Abeokuta, in what is now Ogun State, Nigeria, in the year 1900, a baby girl was born who would one day make kings tremble and governments shake. They named her Frances Abigail Funmilayo Thomas, but the world would come to know her simply as Funmilayo Ransome-Kuti, the woman who could move mountains with nothing but her voice and her courage. Her father, Daniel, was a humble carpenter and farmer whose hands knew the feel of wood and soil. Her mother, Lucretia, was a strong woman who sold beautiful fabrics in the busy Kuta market, where the smell of pepper burned the air and the voices of traders created a symphony of commerce and life. Even as a tiny baby, there was something special about little Funmilayo. Her eyes seemed to ask questions that her mouth could not yet speak. She did not cry without reason, but watched everything around her with the wisdom of an old soul. She listened carefully to every sound, and even in her silence, you could see her mind working like a machine that never stopped. One day, mothers across Nigeria would whisper her name to their daughters like a sacred prayer. Do you know about the woman who made a king kneel before her people? And the ancient trees would seem to lean closer, as if they too remembered her incredible story. Young Funmilayo grew like a strong cassava plant after the first rain, quick, powerful, and impossible to ignore. She attended St. John's School right there in Abeokuta, and then traveled to the great city of Lagos to study at CMS Girls' School, one of the very few schools that taught girls more than just sewing and staying quiet. While other young ladies learned to curtsy and keep their voices low, Funmilayo learned to argue with wisdom and to write with power. In 1919, when she was still a young woman, she did something that shocked everyone. She sailed across the vast ocean to England for further study. This was a bold and dangerous step for any young Yoruba woman in those days. In faraway England, surrounded by cold winds and foreign faces, she made a decision that would change her life forever. She dropped the English name Frances like a coat that no longer fit, and embraced her true Yoruba name, Funmilayo, which means give me joy. But she soon learned that joy alone was not enough. She watched British women fighting hard for their rights, while African women back home were told to wait patiently and stay silent. Right there in that cold English winter, young Funmilayo made a promise to herself that would echo through history. I will not wait. When she returned to Nigeria, she was no longer the same girl who had left. She had crossed mighty oceans and sharpened her voice like a sword. But her beloved Nigeria was still wrapped in the heavy chains of colonial rule, and her people were suffering under the weight of foreign masters. The British ruled Nigeria through local kings who had become like puppets dancing on invisible strings. In Egbaland, they ruled through the Alake, a king who wore beautiful coral beads but had forgotten how to truly serve his people. Women were forced to pay crushing double taxes, while men had the right to vote and women did not. In the markets, women struggled and suffered in silence while their burdens grew heavier each day. Funmilayo began teaching at Abeokuta Grammar School, where she met a good man named Reverend Israel Ransome-Kuti, whose heart burned with the same fire for justice that lived in hers. When they married, they became not just husband and wife, but partners in the fight for what was right. She added his name to hers, not to disappear into his shadow, but to stand proudly beside him as Funmilayo Ransome-Kuti. One morning that would change everything. Funmilayo walked into the familiar Kuta market where her mother had once sold fabrics. But now she saw everything with new eyes. The women's voices were low and tired, their faces wet with sweat from worry and hard work. The taxes on women were crushing their spirits like heavy stones. The British government, working through the Alake, took money from every single thing the women sold: fish, gari, beautiful wrappers, everything. The men stayed silent. The chiefs laughed in their comfortable palaces, growing fat while the people grew thin. Funmilayo sat with the market women, shared their simple pap, listened to their stories, and then spoke words that would start a revolution. What kind of kingdom forces mothers to pay extra money just to feed their own children? She began gathering them together. First 5 women, then 50, then hundreds. In 1946, she formed something that had never existed before, the Abeokuta Women's Union. These brave women trained together, sang powerful protest songs that made the earth shake, and studied the law like merchants learning a new trade that could change their lives. It all began with the sound of footsteps, bare feet, leather sandals, and the gentle music of anklets hidden under colorful wrappers. The guards at the king's palace laughed when they saw the women coming. "What can a bunch of market women possibly do to us?" they asked each other, not knowing they were about to find out. Then came the drums, beating like the heartbeat of a nation awakening. Then came songs rolling down from the sacred Oluyamo hill like thunder announcing a storm. One morning that the palace would never forget, more than 10,000 women marched together toward the Alake's palace. They carried no guns or spears, only voices braided together into a rhythm of power that could not be stopped. Fish sellers walked shoulder to shoulder with onion traders. Palm oil merchants stood united with cloth sellers, all of them moving as one mighty force. Funmilayo led them all, her hands raised high like a general commanding an army of justice. Together they chanted in powerful Yoruba voices that shook the very foundations of the palace. "Alake, you must not be the white man's servant anymore." For days and days, they blocked the gates, the roads, and the council halls. The entire city could not breathe or move without hearing their voices. The palace was surrounded by a sea of determined women who would not be moved. Finally, the Alake came out of his palace wearing his finest royal wrappers, heavy coral beads weighing down his chest like the weight of his shame. His chiefs trembled around him like leaves in a storm. He raised his hand, expecting the women to fall silent and kneel before him as they had always done before. But something had changed in Nigeria. The women did not kneel. Funmilayo stepped forward, wearing only a simple wrapper, her feet dusty from the long march. But her voice cut through the air clean and sharp like a blade of truth. "Kabiyesi, we respect the crown and all it should represent. But when a crown forgets about the people it should protect, it becomes nothing more than expensive decoration." She stood there fearlessly and listed her demands. In the unfair taxes that were killing the women, remove the corrupt chiefs who cared only for themselves, and give women a voice in the decisions that affected their lives. When the king tried to blame everything on the British masters, Funmilayo asked a question that silenced the entire palace. "You are not a slave, Kabiyesi, or are you?" The crowd of women clapped and sang even louder, their voices rising to the heavens like prayers that demanded to be answered. For weeks, the palace gates stayed shut tight, like a guilty mouth that refused to speak the truth. The chiefs called the women wild and dangerous. But Funmilayo was building something much more powerful than just a protest. She was building real power woven together from the wrappers, the wisdom, and the wounded hearts of thousands of women who had finally found their voice. She traveled across all of western Nigeria like a flame spreading from town to town, gathering women from every corner of the land. Traders came to join her. Teachers came. Tailors came. Nobody was too small or too poor to be part of this growing movement. Under the shade of mango trees, she taught them to write petitions that could challenge any chief without fear. She showed them how to organize and plan like generals preparing for the most important battle of their lives. Before every meeting, they would chant together like warriors preparing for war. "No more silence. No more shame. We are the voice of the market flame." By now, Funmilayo had become like a powerful wave washing across all of Nigeria, and even the British officers were beginning to take notice. One confused official asked his colleague, "How is one single woman causing so much trouble and unrest across the entire colony?" The wiser man replied with words that should have been a warning. "She is not just one woman anymore. She has become 10,000. Funmilayo was so bold that she even wrote directly to Queen Elizabeth herself, the mighty Queen of England. If your great throne truly rests on justice as you claim, then why do your officers squeeze money from the poor and step on the necks of women?" When the newspapers printed her letter, it spread across the world like wildfire. The British government became very alarmed by this fearless woman. They tried to bribe her with money and promises, but she refused every offer. They threatened her with prison and punishment, but she only laughed in their faces. They went to her husband and warned him to control his wife, but Reverend Ransome-Kuti simply replied with pride, "My wife fears only God, and God loves justice." By now, the Alake knew that shame had already entered his palace like an unwelcome visitor who would not leave. The chants returned day after day, growing louder and stronger like a river that refuses to be dammed. Women marched daily through the streets, sat at the palace gates like immovable rocks, and refused to sell anything in the markets or pay a single penny in taxes. The entire city began to choke and die without their work, because everyone finally understood that women were the true backbone of the economy. The frightened chiefs came begging the women to stop, but the women had only 3 words for them: step down. Now, finally, the pressure became too much for any man to bear. Oba Ademola II, the Alake of Egbaland, did something that had never happened before in Nigerian history. He gave up his throne and went away into exile, though history tells us he was quietly brought back 2 years later when people hoped the fire had died down. When the news spread that the king had actually stepped down, the markets exploded in songs of victory and women's voices raised in celebration that could be heard for miles around. Women danced in the streets and wept tears of joy and disbelief. For the first time in all of Nigeria's long history, a king had fallen not because of war or the strength of men, but because of women and simple rappers whose voices had become like an unstoppable fire. The throne sat empty like a silent reminder of what could happen when leaders forgot about their people. The women had tasted real power for the first time, and they would never, ever return to silence again. Funmilayo was honored with the title of Iolode, making her one of the most powerful women in Yoruba communities across the land. She expanded her women's union into a national movement that spread like seeds on fertile ground. She fought against child marriage, demanded voting rights for all women, and exposed corruption wherever she found it growing like weeds in the government. She never came to any battle alone. She always came with mothers who had found their strength, widows who refused to be forgotten, and young girls clutching books and dreams. They carried no weapons except the most powerful ones of all: truth and unity. Funmilayo organized markets during the day, wrote powerful letters and speeches by night, and traveled to distant cities spreading her message of justice. She debated with chiefs and turned their insults into fuel for her fire. Her children watched their mother's unbent stance and learned what courage looked like in real life. Her son Fela learned the rhythm of courage before he ever learned to play music. When British officials called his mother a troublesome woman, she would whisper with a smile, "Good, then you know you can hear me clearly." But every hero's story must have its darkest chapter, and Funmilayo's came in 1977 when her son Fela's music was shaking all of Nigeria. He had learned his mother's lessons well and used his songs to call out corrupt soldiers and presidents. The government had had enough of the Ransome-Kuti family. One terrible night, 1,000 soldiers stormed the family property in Lagos, which Fela had turned into a place he called the Calcutta Republic. During this brutal assault, 77-year-old Funmilayo, the lioness who had never backed down from any fight, stood directly in their path to protect her family and her principles. The soldiers seized this elderly woman who had spent her entire life fighting for justice, and in an act of cruelty that shocked the nation, they threw her from a second-floor window. The hard ground caught her broken body, and for the first time since those glorious market marches decades before, the great lioness could no longer roar. Hospital lights replaced the warm sunlight she loved so much. Outside her window, crowds gathered daily chanting, "Ayawao, our mother, The government called it an accident, but everyone in Nigeria knew the truth. After 6 weeks of fighting for her life the way she had fought for everything else, Funmilayo's tired body finally surrendered. On April 13, 1978, Nigeria lost one of its greatest weapons, a woman who had proven that she could move kings and change history. She was the first woman to drive a car in Nigeria, among many other firsts that she had claimed for all the women who would come after her. Her funeral shook the very ground beneath Abeokuta. Thousands upon thousands of women came to say goodbye, some walking barefoot for miles, others wearing special protest cloth to honor her memory. Even the ancient trees seemed to lean in closer, paying their respects to the woman who had changed everything. Her son Fela, the great musician, played no music that day. He simply stood in silence while newspapers across Africa softened their usual harsh tone, as if they were afraid her powerful spirit might be reading over their shoulders. But Funmilayo's story could not be controlled or buried with her body. It lived on, carried forward in the hearts and voices of every woman she had taught to stand up straight and speak with courage. After her burial, women began speaking up in meetings where they had once been silent. Young girls began asking why they could not be leaders too. Her name moved from whisper to warning to inspiration for anyone who dared to dream of changing the world. Across all of Africa, her story lit fires in the hearts of people who had been waiting for someone to show them what was possible. She had fought not just for women's rights, but for the dignity and soul of a nation that was still learning to respect and value its mothers and daughters. Today, a beautiful statue stands proudly in Abeokuta, showing her with her head wrapped in the traditional way, her gaze looking forward toward the future she helped create. Children pass by this statue every single day. Some do not yet know they are walking beside a mountain of a woman whose courage changed their world. She received many honors during her lifetime, including the prestigious Order of the Niger and the Lenin Peace Prize. She was also appointed to the Western House of Chiefs, becoming the first woman ever to achieve this honor. Even now, elders come to touch the stone hand of her statue and whisper words of thanks. Funmilayo Ransome-Kuti had given voice where there had been silence, courage where there had been fear, and opened doors where there had only been walls. Her legacy lives on in every person who refuses to accept injustice and dares to believe that one voice, joined with others, can change the world. And so the legend lives on, not just in the pages of history, but in the choices you make today. Every great story began with someone who refused to accept that things had to stay the same. Someone who looked at impossible odds and whispered, "Watch me." Someone who understood that legends are not born. They are forged in the fire of decision, shaped by discipline, and polished by perseverance. The same blood that flowed through the veins of queens and kings, warriors and wise rulers, innovators and nation builders, that same blood flows through yours. The same spirit that built kingdoms and crossed oceans, that fought for justice and lifted up the fallen, that same spirit lives within you. Your time is now. Your moment is today. Your legend begins with your next choice. Choose vision over blindness. Choose unity over division. Choose courage over fear. Choose to build rather than tear down. Choose to lift others as you climb. Choose to be the change you wish to see, the leader you wish to follow, the hero your community needs. The world needs more legends, and legends come in all shapes, sizes, and colors. They come from villages and cities, from simple homes and royal palaces. What makes them legendary is not where they came from, but where they decided to go. Your story is waiting to be written. Your legend is ready to unfold. The only question is, will you answer the call? Subscribe to When Africa Speaks, and let these stories of greatness fuel the fire of your own destiny. Because when you speak with courage, wisdom, and love, the world stops to listen. The next legend could be you. The next hero could be you. The next great story could be yours. Thank you for watching. And remember, legends never die. They simply inspire new legends to rise.